Hello and welcome to Personable, a podcast focused on speaking to the world's best, enabling you to become the best that you can be. My name is Harvey-Bracken-Smith, and today I'm honored to be joined by Rachel Carrell. Rachel is the founder and CEO of Koru Kids. She's had an absolutely fascinating journey that we're going to dive into straight into this podcast. Rachel, thank you very much for joining me today. I wanted to get started by asking you, how and why did you start Koru Kids?
Well, I first realized how awful childcare was when I had a baby. And before that, I had this really straightforward career. I grew up in a moment in history where you worked hard and you got to the next rung of the ladder and everything made sense. So I went to high school, I went to university, I started working at McKinsey, and I was kind of on this next rung. And then I had a baby and I realized that there was no good system for childcare. And I started talking to my friends who were all experiencing how expensive it was. And some of them were choosing to move out of London, even though they didn't want to, just so that they could be nearer their family and somehow make it through. Some of them were choosing not to have a second child because of the cost, even though they desperately want one. Some of them were choosing to give up their careers. And these were people who I'd been at uni with. I knew how hard they'd worked to build their early careers in the first place. And now I saw them forced to give it up. And everywhere I looked, both myself and my friends, were all of these problems with the lack of childcare system. And so my first thought was, someone must be working on this. Lots of people must be working on this because it's such a massive problem. And at that time I was working in healthcare. I was used to healthcare innovation, and there's so much healthcare innovation. There are thousands, tens of thousands of healthcare startups, and there are so many investors, and you can go to all these different innovation conferences. And so my first assumption was that childcare would be like that. And I thought, I just need to find it. Where's the Childcare Innovation Conference? I'll go. Introduce me to like 100 different childcare startups, and I'll choose the best one and I'll go and work with them. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized there is no Childcare Innovation Conference. There are no investors who specialize in childcare. I can be pretty clear about this. I've been working in it for 10 years now. There really aren't. And there were hardly any startups. And when I say hardly any, there were like two. And so I realized I have to do this myself. And that's why I started Koru Kids.
And what made you want to go about and actually take the leap?
I think sometimes starting a business, people think, you must be brave, or like it must have been a scary leap. But actually, the truth is I had already put a lot of things in place, thinking that at some point I would start a business. So for me, I was just recently married, and for me, I really, really, really wanted my love life to be sorted, my family life to be sorted, because I didn't want to have too many things up in the air at once. And I also had some savings. I've been working really hard and saving really hard. So I had those two things. And then I guess the third ingredient was I was working in a job that I wasn't super passionate about at the time. And I had this realization. And so those were all of the ingredients. And it got to the point where I was kind of like, well, what am I waiting for? So I have the ability to do this. My partner's really supportive. I have this idea. If I don't do this now, I should stop saying I'm ever going to do this, because now is the time. And so it was kind of obvious.
So you have this initial idea for what you want to do, which evolves over time. And you actually, if I'm correct, you go and raise money before you hire your first engineer. What was the thought process behind that?
Yeah, I really had nothing when I started raising. I had a PowerPoint deck and a smile, and that was pretty much it. You're right, I didn't have my first engineer. I didn't even have any employees. It was literally just me. I think I had 7 customers. I don't even think it was that. I think I had 3 paying customers. So really, 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 really early. And I was lucky that I had come from a background, because I'd worked at McKinsey and I had kind of a good network that I could draw on for my first early investment. And so I was able to go out to them, and I had this idea that I wanted to launch with. And the idea actually didn't work in its first incarnation. So we spent like 6 months working on it, and then we pivoted away from it. So it wasn't the thing that I have ended up building, but I did have this idea. And so I started off thinking, well, I'll just go out and raise a small amount of money. So my initial plan was to raise 150,000. Very quickly, actually, I started getting investment offers for more than that, and then I kind of raised my aspirations, and we ended up raising 600,000, which was more than I was expecting. So I think the fundraising journey that I had, I've been very lucky with it.
So coming from McKinsey, you're obviously solving a lot of problems for a lot of different businesses and offering them tailored solutions. There's kind of a joke within Gen Z where people ask, what do consultants actually do? and they kind of get that because they do so many different solutions for so many different businesses. How did you find that transition from offering solutions to other businesses from an outside perspective to actually having to solve those solutions yourself in your own business?
It's really different being a consultant versus being a founder, because you have to do a lot more grunt work as a founder. When you work at one of these big corporates like McKinsey, a lot of the kind of boring or grubby stuff is taken away from you, either by software or a system, or sometimes it's other people doing it. Whereas when you're a founder, and especially when you're starting a business and you're literally doing absolutely everything, there's no one else, it's just you. And so two of the things I have particularly had to learn that McKinsey did not teach me, one of them was sales. You're always selling. When you're a founder, you're always selling. Either you're selling to customers, or you're selling to investors, or you're selling to employees, because that is hard. Like, to convince people to leave their jobs and come and join you when you have nothing, like, that's a sales job. And so that I had to learn. And then the other thing that McKinsey didn't teach me at all was what I call kind of hard-ass people management. So when you learn how to manage people when you're at McKinsey, it's like people management on easy mode. Because you're given when you become a manager at McKinsey, you're given this small team of super bright, really motivated, like very self-governing, self-starting people. And so it's kind of like you've got this really powerful weapon, and all you have to do is kind of like point it, and then it will let go. And not to say there aren't sometimes difficulties, but the difficulties are like someone's working too hard, and you have to like tell them to take a break. Like, that's not that hard, right? Whereas when you are a founder or lots of other types of managers, you deal with all sorts of different people, and there are people who you need to move on from your business, or you need to have tough conversations with. Most people in the world are not like how I described, and there's no HR department. Like, it's just you. And this is the experience of being a founder or being any small business owner. Like, the people issues you have to deal with are like hard. And so McKinsey hadn't taught me that either. But McKinsey had taught me lots of other stuff. I'd learned a lot of analytics. I'd learned a lot of stuff that was really helpful in fundraising. A lot of how to do a workshop, how to like structure an argument, lots of that kind of thing.
I feel like for many people starting a business, a lot of people lose focus on what the main thing is in terms of where they're putting the energy in the most important thing for the business. So what do you think the main thing for the business was when you first started it after you got investing money? And how did you make sure that you were focused on the main thing rather than trying to set up all the other little things? You mentioned HR, you've got all these people problems. How do you balance the two things?
Yeah, it's really hard. The hardest thing about being a founder is focus, and just focus, especially on the quality of the product. And so you just have to the best way to keep yourself there is by having contact with customers as much as you can, but while not getting sucked into the operations. So if you're constantly serving customers in an operational way, you're not going to have time to design the system. But if you're constantly doing other stuff and not having contact with customers, then you're not going to spend time on the most important thing. So the thing to do is you really have to optimize for the right amount of customer feedback. Get some customer feedback, implement it. Get some customer feedback, implement it. Get some, implement. And if you can go into work every day and make your system a little bit better, just like 1% better. 1% compound, right? So if every day you make your system 1% better, over the course of a year, that's going to be a transformational change.
You make it seem very easy in terms of how well you've done. I think you're underselling how well you've done. But obviously, after you've graduated from university and then you've gone to Oxford, worked at McKinsey, and had an incredible career all throughout your 20s before you've gone about and built this business. As you mentioned, you built a great network, and that enabled you to build your first fundraising round. There's these kind of two ends of the stick where you've kind of got the people glamorizing entrepreneurship as these sort of like short-term wins. You can make 10,000 a month very easily by buying my course. But on the other side of things, you've got the type of people that are saying, you've got to wait till you're 50, 60. You've got to get tons of experience, tons of connections. Where do you fall on that graph in terms of recommending entrepreneurship to younger people?
I really like, there's a quote from Elon Musk, which is like something along the lines of, like being an entrepreneur. I wish I can remember the quote now. It's like it's about crawling over broken glass, or like I think it might be about like chewing broken glass, something about broken glass. And the idea, and then he also says, now I wish I had this quote in front of me. He also says, like, I never recommend entrepreneurship to people, because if you're the kind of person who needs to be encouraged, you're not gonna survive the broken glass that you need to like chew. And I kind of do buy that. Like, I don't want to ever over encourage people, because I think there's a lot of people for whom actually being an employee is a better choice for their personality. Like, it is incredibly stressful, existentially, like, risky every day in terms of your career, like, or your business. You know, the business will be near death for a really long time before it feels comfortable. And so if you're not that type of person who, you know, can live in that zone where you're being physically and intellectually challenged all the time, like way beyond even when you don't want to, you know, then perhaps you shouldn't do it. But if you are, so I think you have to be the kind of person who enjoys the feeling of pushing yourself, you know, and it's like that in any sphere of life. Like, there are some people who enjoy that feeling of pushing themselves at the gym, right? And, you know, at the gym, you work out until failure, and that's what you're meant to do, no matter how strong you are. Like, when you start, when you're an Olympian, like, you're always working out till failure, so you always should be feeling that failure point. If you're a person, and that's what entrepreneurship is kind of feels like as well. So if you're that kind of person, then I think you should or could do it. And if you're that kind of person, I truly do not think that there are barriers that can't be overcome. And so I think a lot of the barriers that people think about in their heads, you know, like, I'm a woman and therefore it's harder for me to fundraise, might be a barrier that someone might have, right? Then there are statistics, you know, how very low percentage of VC money goes to women. That's true. It's like 3%. It's really, really low. I'm a firm believer that if you go into a fundraising conversation with that in your mind, it's going to be a massive blocker. And your job is to frame the conversation as, I am going to go and do this. This is a thing that I'm going to do. And you can come along on this journey with me and be a partner if you would like to. And that would be really cool, because I think you're great. But if it's not you, it's going to be someone else. And let me describe to you the opportunity, and we will mutually see whether we are the right partners to go on this journey together. And if you frame it like that, it'll be a much more positive conversation. I think there's a lot that you can do about mindset. I also think it is true that it's not what you know, it's who you know. I do think that is true. And a lot of what I've done has been through my network. How I raised money, how I hired people, how I learned what to do, how I solved all sorts of problems. I use my network all the time. But it's also true that I grew up in New Zealand in a small sheep farming town. My parents are both teachers. I went to my local university. Like, I had zero London financial network, right? And so I built it myself, all of it. And so that it's not, you don't have to be born into it. Like, you absolutely don't have to be born into it. But if you're not born into it, which I wasn't, you have to make it. Like, you do have to make it, but you can do that.
I wanted to look up the quotes that you mentioned, and the first quote you mentioned from Elon Musk was, starting a company is like staring into the abyss and eating glass. And there was another Elon Musk quote that I really like, is essentially, if you want to do something in 10 years, go and try and do it in 6 months. And you're not necessarily going to get to that goal, but you're going to be a lot further ahead than if you hadn't tried. I really like your focus on like personal growth and development. And I think that's kind of become kind of a core line of purpose of something I've tried to do through this podcast. Because I was chatting to you before you asked me why I started this podcast. And I was essentially explaining that by learning from many of the great people in the world, there were kind of like little bits that I took from them that enabled me to improve in my own life. And I think entrepreneurship, but also life, are these two kind of things where you constantly have to learn and grow and iterate. And what works for one person might not work for another. And the success of one person might be a failure for another. So I think it's this kind of like level of introspection to keep on going. How have you kind of found your attitude towards learning has evolved over time through building a business? And how do you constantly force yourself to learn even when times are tough?
I think I naturally am a learner. I'm bored when I'm not learning, which is actually a problem, by the way, because a lot of what you have to do in a startup is kind of repetitive. Always, especially I'm 10 years into my startup now. The important metrics for my business are the same as what they were, 9 years ago, and I need to continually look at them. So I need to keep my motivation up. But the thing that actually really motivates me is learning about new stuff. And so what that means is I've had to craft my role in the business around the new stuff around me learning new stuff, which means I kind of hire behind myself. And I'm always the one who's kind of like exploring the new territory. And how I learn a lot through peer groups, and I'm in so many WhatsApp groups I couldn't even count. I'm in like 200 WhatsApp groups. It's insane. And so, for example, AI is a good example of a really fast moving frontier, right? And so I learn about it on Twitter, and I occasionally will listen to a podcast or something. But mostly, actually, I learn because I'm in a really, really, really good WhatsApp group of founders we're all trying to implement stuff in AI in our companies all the time. And it's a trusted group where we know each other personally. We meet up every so often, and we are comfortable like asking stupid questions and getting things wrong. And, someone will do something and then someone else will go, that's kind of a security problem you've got there. And then someone else will go, so we're comfortable like learning together. And so I think our learning is really.
How do you bring in innovation? So AI has kind of been brought upon the world as if it's like the biggest revolutionary change in a very long time. How do you both implement that without changing your core business?
So we're using AI, I would say, at almost every level of the business. So we're using it to help us help customers more. So, we're using it, for example, internally to summarize a customer's issue so that we can route it to the right person and they can get back in detail in a really good way. We're using it to do analysis. So we don't like put it in ChatGPT and get them to do analysis. What we do is we use something like Claude Code to make little bits of software that then help us do the analysis. We are building little AI bots for various things. One of them that I'm particularly excited about because I made it is a cookbook. So it's long been an issue that many of our nannies are incredible cooks, but some of our nannies are not incredible cooks. So we've long wanted to help our nannies with their cooking. And years ago, we made a Koru Kids cookbook, and it included a whole bunch of recipes that are like good for kids. And that was cool, but it's the same cookbook for everyone, right? I mean, that's what a cookbook is, right? You buy a cookbook from the shop. If you and I both buy the same cookbook, we both get the same recipes, and you might like 5 of them out of 30 or whatever, and I might like a different 5. But wouldn't it be better? I'm gluten-free. So wouldn't it be better if my version of that book, the recipes were gluten-free, and your version, they weren't, or maybe they were whatever you are, like vegetarian or whatever. And so that's the kind of AI concept is, what if we could make a cookbook that was personalized for every family based on their dietary requirements? Maybe they're halal, maybe their kids just don't like, I don't know, raisins or whatever. And so we made this app, and you just put in all of your preferences, however many you want. You can answer as many questions as you want, and then it auto-generates your version of the cookbook and emails it to you. And I just love that kind of thing.
That's absolutely incredible. I really like your attitude towards innovation. I think I'd kind of seen a little bit of that on LinkedIn with regard to how you approach problems, but whether it be WhatsApp group chats or constantly speaking to people in order to learn and not being afraid to ask silly questions. Something that I'm incredibly bullish on, and I just hinted at it there, is obviously AI, but more so the power of social media and building distribution. At what point did you learn that LinkedIn and other social media platforms were really important for the distribution and the sales and kind of became a necessity for building your business?
So I built the business initially on Facebook. Which kind of shows you how old the business is. So it's 10 years old, and I launched in 2016. And in that year, that was when Facebook groups were new and kind of just coming up. And a lot of people were still on Facebook. Now people have kind of left Facebook, but in 2016, a lot of more people were still on it. And so the way I built it was by posting about childcare and about my company in groups, in parent groups, which were just forming in Facebook. And then people kind of started leaving Facebook, and Instagram started growing around about it existed before then, but it kind of took over in like 2018 or something like that. And then at that point I had a big problem because I am not an Instagram person at all. I'm not very visual. As you might be able to tell, I'm a talking person. I'm like a words person. And I'm on it technically, but like I never open it. I'm just not that person. I don't get it instinctively. I hate watching videos. I just don't do it. And so I missed that train completely. And I saw all these parenting influencers and like kind of coming up on Instagram. Obviously, I didn't see them personally. I wasn't using it, but I heard about them. And over time, my marketing team started working with these parenting influencers on Instagram. And so we were paying them to, try out our service and whatever, do a review. And I saw how much we were paying them. And I was like, oh my goodness, why am I not doing any of this? I've got a million thoughts about these topics, but I can't bring myself. I'm just not that Instagram person. And so then I saw people come, and I'd love to do it on Facebook, but Facebook is kind of like passe at that point. And then I saw people coming up on LinkedIn, and I had a couple of friends personal friends who had amassed big followings on LinkedIn by talking about leadership and business topics. And so I started talking about the same sort of thing, leadership. And then I was like, what I'd really like to do is I'd like to talk about, I don't see anyone on LinkedIn talking about the intersection of family and working life, and talking about parenting in a kind of personal development kind of, in a LinkedIn-ish kind of way, like education, because that's why people open LinkedIn, it's like for education. And that I just found it fun. And so I started talking about these things that I was interested in on LinkedIn, and people started really responding. And I've also got 3 kids myself. I've got kids who are 3, 8, and 11. And so it works quite well with my life, because I will very often have a problem at the weekend or something with one of my kids. I'll give you an example from this weekend. My 11-year-old was rude to me a couple of times yesterday. And I was, in the moment, I was thinking, I was like, how do I respond? Like, what should I do about this? Like, this is starting to become a thing. And I'm thinking about this personally. Like, the question is, how do you cope with, how do you think about thoughtfully, like, not having your children be rude to you as they get older, when if you're sort of always calm and gentle, you don't want to be a doormat, but you also don't want to be, I don't want to be like a screaming authoritarian, like fear-based parent either. So what's the third alternative? Like, how am I going to do it? How am I going to do this? So I will think about that personally, and then I'm definitely going to make a piece of content about that. Because I think if I'm interested in that question, like a lot of people are going to be interested in that question. And then I'm pretty sure that piece of content is going to do quite well on LinkedIn, because I think it's quite an interesting topic.
Did you work out the answer to the problem?
So the thing that it's funny, because I'm probably going to make this content today, but I haven't actually made it yet. The thing that I have started doing with her, which is working quite well, is saying, would you like to try that again? And she actually responds quite well, because what happens in the moment when she speaks to me rudely, she then, it causes her to pause, and she then reflects. You can see it on her face, and then she goes, and then she says something else. But sometimes it's the same thing, it's just in a nicer tone, and then we just move on.
Yeah, I think it's a really tough balance. So I'm 21 years old, but I have a 19-year-old, 19-year-old brother, 17-year-old brother, and I have an 11-year-old sister. So it's really interesting to see how my parents would like talk to her versus talk to us. And I think a problem or something that I find harder being the elder child is when I was younger, my parents were had very high expectations of me, but I'd also get in trouble over like the smallest things, where I feel like with her, they're so lenient about so many things. And it's like, how do you kind of strike this balance between being nice and kind to your children, but also kind of putting your foot down sometimes to push them? Like, I feel like my parents, when they put their foot down, it made me work harder. It made me be more respectful. Whereas I feel like sometimes, not with her now really, but a couple of years ago with her more so, she was able to get away with many more things.
It's very hard, because it's also about their personality and where they are. So if you have a child who is kind of like, like this, but slips up sometimes, as a parent, you're kind of always trying to pull them up a little bit like that. But then if you have a sibling who is like always, rude or naughty or whatever, so they're kind of down here, if you stay up here, you're just yelling at them the whole time, like the whole time. So you can't do that, right? So you have to come down. There's like a certain amount. It's like a fixed amount of yelling or whatever, or telling them off that you want to do. And that feels like unfairness between siblings, but it kind of is what it is.
There's a quote I really like from Albert Einstein, which is essentially, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes looking for the right question to ask and 5 minutes finding the answer. And I really like your answer there with regard to your daughter and finding the balance between telling her off versus not, because it's something that I try and engage with myself as well. And it's also something that I feel like AI can't replace, because AI is full of so much information, but it doesn't have the human experience. I could look up online, what is it like to attend Oxford University? But without having your lived experience through that, I don't know what it's like on December 4th if you've received a bad grade, like one below getting a first, and you can't go do your job. Or, I'm sure there's that's a very unrelatable thing for most listeners, but I'm
Yeah.
sure there are so many different examples that they're not able to reach, where even your example there, I'm not a parent, and yet I feel like I can relate to that. And I think LinkedIn as a platform, it's something that I love doing, and, much smaller than you, but I'm trying to learn as well. And I think that it not only serves as a way to build great audience, but it also serves as a great way to order your thoughts in a manner that enables you to think of things differently.
Yeah, I think that's right. A lot of the time I find I will start to make a piece of content, and this one we're talking about is a good example, where I have some idea of kind of the answer, but the process of making the piece of content involves me like thinking about it properly, doing some research. I'll look at studies. I like to be very evidence-based, and then I might change my mind about some things as I go. So I'm kind of, the process of me learning about it and the process of me making the content, it's the same thing. It's like the same process. So that means that my audience learning about a thing and me learning about a thing, it's the same. It's the same moment.
When I want to go back to one of the first reasons why you started your business in the first place, which was based on the experiences you had as a mother and not having a solution to it. So my mum was also an entrepreneur. She built up her own business and actually worked, pretty much all throughout her life, whilst also being a mother to 4 kids. But she was still very present, come to all our sports games. I speak to her every day. And I definitely think she sometimes felt guilty for working because she wanted to be there for her mum. And she was an amazing mother. How do you strike this balance between being a great mother, but also being a great businesswoman? Is there a sense of something called balance, or do you have to sometimes go all in on one thing and then all in on the other?
Well, luckily now I'm in a place of my business where I think I've got much more of a balanced existence. But definitely in the early days, like getting anything off the ground is so all-consuming. And so when I had just one baby, I remember that very first summer I worked every single weekend, and thank goodness I had a really supportive husband who was excited that I was doing this. And I would go off to train nannies all weekend, and he would be like encouraging me and excited to hear how it went when I came home. That was really, really important. And then as time has gone by, I have managed to build up a team who are so good, and so I'm not now needed for anything operational, and so I am able always to make all of my kids' events. But I think the sequencing of that stuff was really important, and I feel very lucky. I think also because of the nature of my job, I have an incredible nanny. I have an incredible system around me. And then I guess the last ingredient for me is I can work from home. And that is huge because it means I get to, my kids will come home from school in a few minutes. And, when we're finished chatting, I'll go down and I'll be able to hang out with them for a little bit and then come back up here and keep on working. And I don't have a commute. And so all of those things, just being in charge of your schedule, which you are if you're the owner of your business, is just priceless.
It makes complete sense from a business standpoint in terms of why someone would want a nanny in their home. But I feel like after you came up with the idea and you're thinking about how to scale and make the best product possible, I think there's kind of like an added layer which most businesses don't actually have to face, but you do, in which you kind of have to think about safety, because a child is the most important thing in a parent's life, and yet you're kind of entrusting someone else to look after them. How did you think about safety when you first built the business? Where did the idea for the training program come in? And how do you ensure the safety of every child even today?
Yeah, this is so huge, and you can imagine it's something we thought about just endlessly. I always wanted to go above and beyond what we had to do, certainly above and beyond the regulations, but also above and beyond what other people did. And risk, one of my team described risk the other day in a way that I really liked, which is he said it's like a Swiss cheese where you kind of have you have many layers. I think he said Swiss cheese in a sieve. His metaphor was better anyway. The idea was you have many, many, many layers, and no layer is completely impermeable. In other words, there's no such thing as a 100%. But what you do is you have many, many of these layers. And so if something doesn't get caught by one thing, it gets caught by the next thing, it gets caught by the next thing. And, thank goodness we've now done over 1 million pickups. We've done almost 5 million hours of care, and we have not had like a serious incident in all of that time, which I think is incredible. And we've had lots of times where we've picked something up. we've had lots of times where, we've caught things on DBSs, or we've not let people join our platform, and then we sometimes because one of my team had a bad feeling, or something came up in a reference, or not sometimes it's a hard thing, sometimes it's a soft thing, and then sometimes years later we've found out that something had happened with them elsewhere, and we thought, oh, thank goodness. So it's a lot of little things that go together. It's thinking about how you design your software. It's having really good cybersecurity. It's training your people really well. It's hiring really good people. It's looking for really good judgment and just intelligence in your people and empathy. It's having we have a 2-strike system where we look for like early signs. We have ways that we look at usage and activity on our platforms. That would be like a software and tracking metric. We liaise really well. We work really closely with local councils. We liaise with other platforms. There's like 100 things we do. And one of the core processes that actually has been really important is that we have a really good continuous improvement process. And so every time if we ever have a near miss, or every time there's an anything, someone does something that it's not bad, but it's kind of like, it's like on the way to being bad. We have a process where we look at that individual holistically. We get everything we know about that person, and we look at all of it, and we call in everyone who was involved with that thing, and then we say, how could we have picked this up? And then we'll do something. We'll change our software, or change our process, or we'll have an agreement between people, whatever the thing is that would have picked up that. And when you do that for 10 years, that's where the kind of the layers come. It just gets safer and safer and safer over time.
I think a big thing, again, I don't have a kid, so I'm kind of imagining it, but I would imagine for a parent is less of the case of the minute what works or what doesn't, but it's more so the knowledge of that you are constantly seeking how to make it the best platform possible, because it's not always about on an absolute case, is this the safest, is this incredibly safe, which of course it is. But it's also if a parent was going to hire a nanny by themselves, it's much harder to get the data to confirm, is this one individual? They don't always fit into a statistical analysis of coming out. You can always have these random people, these outliers, or versus do you go to a platform that's had 1 million successful instances where things haven't happened based on all their knowledge? And I really admire your talking to you now through 10 years, although there are still many things you've done repeatedly, that you're constantly looking for ways to improve that system, because I'd imagine that trust is one of the most fundamental things in your business.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it absolutely is. And we're really conscious of that. And right now it's 3:50 p.m. right now. And right now, 3,000 kids are being picked up by one of our nannies. And I think this often at around about this time of day. And I'm like, whew, a lot of kids.
There's a really interesting case study over the past 5 years in which UK influencer KSI and American influencer Logan Paul came together and built this brand called Prime, which reached more than $1 billion in sales, basically because they're two of the biggest influencers in the world. And it kind of showed this constant graph of it getting more and more sales year over year. But in the past 1 to 2 years, that has dramatically fallen off because users don't necessarily like the taste. It's got incredibly large amounts of caffeine contents, which mean that consumers don't actually like the product, even though the hype was really large. How do you think you went from a base of getting lots of influencers through Facebook, Instagram, and through your own thing on LinkedIn in terms of getting users, and actually being able to retain users over time? What do you think about your user experience kept a lot of people?
Just inherent to having a nanny. If you have someone pick up your kids at 3:00 and take them home, that is such a transformative thing for your life. And what we're delivering is so fundamental and sort of profound, the change that it can cause to your life. So it's very unlike a soft drink in that way. You can, whether or not you have a soft drink on a day is not really going to make that much difference to your day. Whereas whether you have someone that you really like taking care of your kids so that you can arrive home, and instead of it being a fractious mess and you've got to get dinner and they've got to do homework and they're ratty and tired and now you're tired too, and then you've got to get back online to work because you left work slightly early and you're just having a terrible day, right? The difference in that, and you arrive home at 6:30, your young kids are in their jammies, they've had their dinner, they're happy, they're being read a story, they've done their spellings, whatever the thing is, and you're just arriving home to a calm and peaceful day, life, evening. That is just such a difference. And so we don't really need to do that much in addition to make it nice, because it just is nice. And so what we do is, we do a lot of the paperwork around, and we do lots of support for the nannies on an ongoing basis, and we administer things like pension, and we make sure that insurance is right. And so we do a lot of that. And if the nanny has any problems with behavior with the kids, we have in-house coaches who can help them. And same with the parents, have any difficult conversation they want to have, we can coach. So there's a ton of extra stuff that we do and can do. Cookbook's another good example. But fundamentally, it's just good. It's just nice to have a nanny in your life. So it kind of sustains itself.
What is a question that you want to be asked more about, but you're not often asked enough, that I haven't asked you on this podcast?
That's a fun question. I think I'm getting really excited about talking about AI at the moment. I'm kind of obsessively trying to stay at the cutting edge and understand where the whole industry, the whole internet and marketplaces are going. So one of the things that I am thinking about a lot now is if you have an agent and you're looking for a nanny, and rather than you going on our website, you're now getting your agent to go on our website, how should our website change? What about our website have we made to appeal to humans rather than agents? And how might we change what we're doing, and what do we have to change? That's something I think about quite a lot. I think about agents a lot, and I think about the future of work a lot as well, related to AI and agents. I think a lot about what my kids are going to be doing. My eldest daughter is really, really interested in languages. She loves them. And I myself studied linguistics in my undergrad. I know I said before we started that my undergrad was politics. It was actually a double major. It was politics and linguistics. And so I love languages and linguistics. But at the same time, I have my Apple AirPods that already do simultaneous translation now. So fast forward that, 5-10 years, I don't know, should she be doing languages? These are some of the things that I think about.
If I may, I wanted to respond to those thoughts on the AI agent thing, because I've had a lot of nannies in my family over the years with much younger siblings than me. If I'm 21 and I've got an 11-year-old sister, it's like 20 years worth of nannying at this point. And I kind of found that there were two things. One, I think specificity is so important, like from the interest that they have to the things that they bake. I feel like, people are often put into these large, census-based categories. But for me, I don't think race, I think gender was important, having a female nanny for our family. But I don't think I think it was more about specific interests that was really important. And then the other thing is that in an AI world, there is a thought of that you'd want things to be more digitalized. But I actually was listening to an interesting podcast the other day, and it was saying what will still remain human even in the age of AI. So, for example, if you've got people managing multi-billion-dollar pension funds, there is an element that even if AI was more advanced, you would want a human touch, because it's more about the preservation of wealth rather than the creation of it. And I think that if I was to want a nanny as well, I think I'd also want some form of human element as well, because it's not just about getting the perfect nanny. But there's something a human can see in the safety of a person. Like what you said, when the people that work at your company, they might not have had something, but someone just got a hunch. And I think that's what we want, particularly around kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the interest of time, I want to ask you one final question, and I ask this to every guest on Personable, and that is, what is one thing you would want the listener to take away from this episode?
I think don't put barriers in your mind based on who you are.
I feel like I learned a tremendous amount. I can definitely appreciate your level towards innovation, introspection, this constant form of improvement, whether that be the safety of nannies, constantly pushing your website on the age of AI, and even though you might not know the solution yet to how AI is going to fundamentally move in the next 5 years, I think that you're looking at the right ways to improve it. So thank you so much for taking the time. I've learned a tremendous amount. When I have kids one day, I'll use Koru Kids, and I appreciate you chatting to me.